Snow Crash, Chapter 57. Lagos figured all this out. He was originally a researcher at the Library of Congress, later became part of CIC when it absorbed the library. He made a living by discovering interesting things in the library, facts no one else had bothered to dig up. He would organize these facts and sell them to people. Once he figured out all of this Enki Asherah stuff, he went looking for someone who would pay for it, and he settled on Elbob Rife, Lord of Bandwidth, owner of the fiber optics monopoly, who at that time employed more programmers than anyone else on Earth. Lagos, typically for a non-businessman, had a fatal flaw. He thought too small. He figured that with a little venture capital, this neurolinguistic hacking could be developed as a new technology that would enable Rife to maintain possession of information that had passed into the brains of his programmers. Which, moral considerations aside, wasn't a bad idea. But Rife likes to think big. He immediately saw that this idea could be much more powerful. He took Lagos' idea and told Lagos himself to fuck off. Then, he started dumping a lot of money into Pentecostal churches. He took a small church in Bayview, Texas, and built it up into a university. He took a small-time preacher, the Reverend Wayne Bedford, and made him more important than the Pope. He constructed a string of self-supporting religious franchises all over the world, and used his university and its metaverse campus to crank out tens of thousands of missionaries who fanned out all over the Third World and began converting people by the hundreds of thousands, just like St. Louis Bertrand. Elbob Rife's glossolalia cult is the most successful religion since the creation of Islam. They do a lot of talking about Jesus, but like many self-described Christian churches, it really has nothing to do with Christianity except that they use his name. It's a post-rational religion. He also wanted to spread the biological virus as a promoter or enhancer of the cult, but he couldn't really get away with doing that through the use of cult prostitution because it's so flagrantly anti-Christian. But one of the major functions of his Third World missionaries was to go out into the hinterlands and vaccinate people, and there was more than just vaccine in those needles. Here in the First World, everyone's already been vaccinated, and we don't let religious fanatics come up and poke needles into us. But we do take a lot of drugs. So, for us, he devised a means for extracting the virus from human blood serum and packaged it as a drug known as Snow Crash. In the meantime, he got the raft going as a way of transporting hundreds of thousands of his cultists from the wretched parts of Asia into the United States. The media image of the raft is that it's a place of utter chaos, where thousands of different languages are spoken and there's no central authority, but it's really not like that at all. It's highly organized and tightly controlled. These people are all talking to each other in tongues. Elbob Rife has taken xenoglossia and perfected it, turned it into a science. He can control these people by grafting radio receivers into their skulls, broadcasting instructions, directly into their brainstems. If one person in 100 has a receiver, he can act as the local N and distribute the of Elbob Rife to all the others. They'll act out Elbob Rife's instructions as though they've been programmed to. And right now, he has about 1 million of these people poised off the California coast. He also has a digital metavirus in binary code that can infect computers or hackers via the optic nerve. How did he translate it into binary form? Nya says. I don't think he did. I think he found it in space. Rife owns the biggest radio astronomy network in the world. He doesn't do real astronomy with it, he just listens for signals from other planets. It stood to reason that sooner or later, one of his dishes would pick up the metavirus. Wait, how does that stand to reason? Okay, see, the metavirus is everywhere. Anywhere life exists, the metavirus is there too, propagating through it. Originally, it was spread around on comets. I mean, that's probably how life first came to Earth, and that's probably how the metavirus came here also. But comets are slow, whereas radio waves are fast. In binary form, a virus can bounce around the universe at the speed of light. It infects a civilized planet, gets into its computers, reproduces, and inevitably gets broadcast on television or radio or whatever. Those transmissions don't stop at the edge of the atmosphere. They radiate out into space, forever. And if they hit a planet with another civilized culture, where people are listening to the stars the way Rife was doing, then that planet gets infected too. I think that was Rife's plan, and I think it worked. Except that Rife was smart. He caught it in a controlled manner. He put it in a bottle. An informational warfare agent for him to use at his discretion. When it's placed into a computer, it snow crashes the computer by causing it to infect itself with new viruses. But it's much more devastating when it goes into the mind of a hacker, a person who has an understanding of binary code built into the deep structures of his brain. The binary metavirus will destroy the mind of a hacker. So Rife can control two kinds of people, Ya says. He can control Pentecostals by using May, written in the mother tongue, and he can control hackers in a much more violent fashion by damaging their brains with binary viruses. Exactly. What do you think Rife wants? Ya says. I don't know, he wants to be Osmandius, King of Kings. Look, it's simple. Once he converts you to his religion, he can control you with his May. And he can convert millions of people to his religion because it spreads like a fucking virus. People have no resistance to it because no one is used to thinking about religion. People aren't rational enough to argue about this kind of thing. Basically, anyone who reads the National Enquirer or watches pro wrestling on TV is easy to convert. And with Snow Crash as a promoter, it's even easier to get converts. Rife's key realization was that there's no difference between modern culture and Sumerian culture. We have a huge workforce that's illiterate or alliterate and relies on TV, which is sort of an oral tradition, and we have a small, extremely literate power elite, the people who go into the metaverse, basically, who understand that information is power and who control society because they have this semi-mystical ability to speak magic computer languages. But that makes us a big stumbling block to Rife's plan. People like Elbob Rife can't do anything without us hackers. And even if he could convert us, he wouldn't be able to use us, because what we do is creative in nature and can't be duplicated by people running May. But he can threaten us with the blunt instrument of Snow Crash. And that, I think, is what happened to David. It may have just been an experiment, just to see if Snow Crash worked on a real hacker, and it may have been a warning shot intended to demonstrate Rife's power to the hacker community. The message: if Asherah gets broadcast into the technological priesthood, napalm on wildflowers, Ya says. Yeah, as far as I know, there's no way to stop the binary virus. But there's an antidote to Rife's bogus religion. The Namshub of Enki still exists. He gave a copy to his son Marduk, who passed it on to Hammurabi. Now, Marduk may or may not have been a real person. The point is that Enki went out of his way to leave the impression that he had passed on his Namshub in some form. In other words, he was planting a message that later generations of hackers were supposed to decode if Asherah should rise again. And I'm fairly certain that the information we need is contained within a clay envelope that was excavated from the ancient Sumerian city of Eridu in southern Iraq 10 years ago. Eridu was the seat of Enki. In other words, Enki was the local end of Eridu, and the temple of Eridu contained his May, including the Namshub that we're looking for. Who excavated this clay envelope? The Eridu dig was sponsored entirely by a religious university in Bayview, Texas. Elbob Rife's? Yep, you got it. He created an archaeology department whose sole function was to dig up the city of Eridu, locate the temple where Enki stored all of his May, and take it all home. Elbob Rife wanted to reverse engineer the skills that Enki possessed. By analyzing Enki's May, he wanted to create his very own neurolinguistic hackers, who could write new May that would become the ground rules, the program, for the new society that Rife wants to create. Yeah, but among these May is a copy of the Namshub of Enki, Ya says, which is dangerous to Rife's plan. Right. He wanted that tablet too, not to analyze so much, but to keep to himself, so no one could use it against him. If you can obtain a copy of this Namshub, Ya says, what effect would it have? Well, if we could transmit the Namshub of Enki to all the N on the raft, they would relay it to all of the raft people. It would jam their mother tongue neurons and prevent Rife from programming them with new May, Hero says. But we really need to get this done before the raft breaks up, before the refuse all come ashore. Rife talks to his N through a central transmitter on the Enterprise, which I take to be a fairly short-range, line-of-sight type of thing. Pretty soon, he'll use this system to distribute a big May that will cause all the refuse to come ashore as a unified army with coordinated marching orders. In other words, the raft will break up, and after that, it won't be possible to reach all these people anymore with a single transmission. So we kinda have to do it as soon as possible. Mr. Rife will be most unhappy, Ya predicts. He'll try to retaliate by unleashing Snow Crash against the technological priesthood. Yeah, I know that, Hero says, but I can really only worry about one thing at a time. I could use a little help here. That's easier said than done, Ya says. To reach the core, one must fly over the raft or drive a small boat through its midst. Rife has 1 million people there with rifles and missile launchers. Even high-tech weapons systems cannot defeat organized small arms fire on a massive scale. Okay, get some choppers out to this vicinity then, Hero says. Something. Anything. If I can get my hands on the Nam-Shobavenki and infect everyone on the raft with it, then you can approach safely. We'll see what we can come up with, Uncle Enzo says. Okay, fine, Hero says. Now, what about reason? Nya mumbles something, and a card appears in his hand. Here's a new version of the system software, he says. It should be a little less buggy. A little less? Well, no piece of software is ever bug-free, Nya says. Uncle Enzo says, I guess there's a little bit of Asherah in all of us.
It don't take time for me to blow your mind.